How many of you are airport people watchers? If you are one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, you go in the airport and you're sitting there and waiting, and you just like to watch people. And you kind of wonder, what's going on in their life? Are they coming? Are they going? Are they having a good day or a bad day? Where do they work? You know, what's it like? What's their story? And you kind of, some people play games about it, but I just love to be able to watch them and kind of see and figure it out. Well, today we're starting a 4-week series that's called My Life, God's Story. And in this series, every one of us has a story. Our life is unique only to us. No one else has a life like ours. Ours is very unique. And that yet each one of our lives is part of one story, God's story. The Bible is described as God's story book. It's a description in the Bible of really God revealing Himself to mankind. And yet it's more than that, because really what it is God sharing His story in our life. And God showing how our life is a part of His story. And so for the next 4 weeks, what I want to do is I want to be able to take a look and see, how does our life connect into this story of God? How does the overall story of the Bible seem to be able to describe or impact our lives and help us kind of see how we play out in that whole story? That we play a part in every part of the Bible and what is being said. If the Bible was to be described as a movie or as a play, you would look at it as 4 movements or 4 acts that we're going to take a look at that kind of play out our relationship between God and us. And so the first week we're going to talk about the relationship of creation and brokenness. And then the next week, each one we have an object kind of here. And then in the next week we talk about the relationship of promise and of law. And then we go on, the third week we talk about rebellion and we talk about grace and that relationship of the act or the story that goes in that. And then finally the fourth week we're going to talk about the act or the story or the relationship between the Spirit and eternity. And each one of those stories play out in our own lives as we live out our lives and as we see how we're a part of what God's life is being described. And also each act gives us a specific message that carries through them all. And that message is that God is rescuing us. That God is at work, actively working, like the story in Luke 15 about the lost sheep and the lost coin and the lost son, are all sending the same message about God is rescuing us. God is repairing what is broken. God is making right what is wrong. And that's how our story kind of comes into this. And so today we're going to look at the story of creation, or this act of creation and brokenness and the relationship there. And you know, I mean, we often think of that in the creation story when we look at those first 3 chapters of Genesis. And that's where we're going to be if you want to follow along in the Bible. We think of it, okay, it's a story of creation and it's a story of sin. It's a story of God making something, and then we ask if we can borrow it and we break it. You know, kind of like we all feel sometimes when we got something new. And we tend to think of it that way, and yet really it goes so much more deeper than that in a bigger story of what God is doing. And so that's what we're going to look at today. So the first thing I want to look at is kind of signs of creation. What the creation story is about and what we see. And we see in the creation story a glimpse of life in the way that it should have been. Life the way that it was supposed to be, that God designed it. When you heard it described in the video clip that we saw, or if you're in your Bible on page 1, when you see the creation, at the end of each day, God looks at it and says, hey, that's good. And when God says it's good, God isn't like a lot of us saying that's good enough. For God, something as good is perfect. And then it goes on, and when he goes and he creates, mankind, he ends it in the end by saying it's very good. That there's something unique to us because we're created in God's image. And so all of that creation we see is that God is creating a place of perfection that's being described in here. If you were to go through this and look at kind of words that would describe the creation story, words that are both in here and even you can kind of picture, it'd be words like this. And they're in an insert. Their program has an insert if you want to follow along. And words like harmony, being together, and honesty, and safety, and community, and walking with God, and peace, and order and freedom. You see that it breaks down like in verse 29 of the first chapter. It talks about how God had said, he says, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, every tree that has fruit. And he says, this is your food to humans. This is our food. And then he goes on to say, and then for the birds of the air and the animals, the creatures of the ground, he says, everything that has breath, he says, I give every green plant for food. That's the food that he created. In other words, we see in this picture of creation, there's no death. There's no animals killing animals. There's no bloodshed. I mean, it would be terrible. I can imagine Animal Planet at that saying, okay, let's follow the lion. He's sneaking up on a zebra. What does he do? Oh, he licks the zebra. You know, let's see a group of hyenas eating berries off a tree. I mean, it wouldn't go very well. But it was the calmness and the harmony that's being described in that passage of this is what creation was meant to be like when God created it. Second chapter in verse 25, as he talks about the man and his wife, he says, we're both naked and they felt no shame. And we're not talking about they look good in the mirror here. We're talking about the creation of the nakedness of this honesty that exists, that there's no deception. There's no shame or regret. There's no fear or hurt or tears that exist. It's a perfect harmony and a peace of relationship that exists. The whole creation is in order, even to the context of weeds. I mean, if you know the definition of weeds, I worked at a farm company, it's a plant out of place. So even a flower could be a weed if it's in the wrong spot. And we know when you look later in kind of the punishment, if you will, or the consequence of sin, that it talks about, okay, there's going to be weeds. You know, he kind of warns us, the guys are going to be dealing with weeds. I mean, creation had perfect order. And when you think of that, I mean, every one of us, there's got to be a part of us who longs for that. We want to live a life of harmony. We want to live a sense of peace and of order and a sense of honesty with other people in relationships. That we feel like we don't have to have masks or we don't have to wear some kind of a security blanket to guard against because we feel totally free, totally honest. We want that. We want to have a place that we're not worried about someone, kind of attacking us or someone kind of harming us, that there's a sense of community that we have, of belonging together, and a kind of a walking with God. There's something beautiful about that description of what creation is really like. And that whole, the whole fullness and the peace that exists in that. But we see glimpses of it once in a while. I mean, you have moments in our life where we're thinking, oh, this is beautiful, this is harmonious, but it doesn't last. And that's part of the story of God's story in creation that was never meant to last. God, included in this story of creation, God created a tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He allowed a fallen angel to become a snake and who was totally set on breaking the relationship between humanity and God. He could have avoided that. He could have said, you know what, the tree idea, it's out. Satan, not an option. Can't do that. He could have done that. He could have created let creation live in perfection forever and ever through that tree of life. And yet he knew that wouldn't be a relationship that would be honest. That'd be a relationship that's forced. There would be no choice of loving God for who He is. The willingness to freely want to be in that relationship with Him. He knew that by eliminating all those things, it would eliminate the kind of relationship that we really all long for. And so in many ways, God is like a farmer buying a brand new farm vehicle. He knows that, hey, when I get it out in the field, it's going to get dirty. It's going to get scratched. And so God knew that by giving us the freedom to choose Him, that it's going to allow us to fail, and we did. And so we have this creation picture of what God intended to be like, but then mixed in that, then we have this picture of brokenness that comes into that story. And so then moving into the signs of brokenness that we see that, given the freedom to choose, we choose ourselves.